food deliveries are not profitable. What makes Hunger Station different? What do you think about the junior product position?
Sounds like a trick question, but yes.
Do you feel any imposter syndrome going from your position at Microsoft to being a CPO of a big company like Hunger Station?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And this is a very good question, actually. I'm glad you asked it because
Today, I'm joined with Abu Obeida, a renowned people-oriented product leader in the GCC. With over 15 years at Microsoft, he contributed to a product like Windows Vista, Windows 7, .NET, and MSN. At Amazon, he served as the sole product manager for Kindle tablets and Fire Phone developer tools, overseeing the development of the SDKs and emulators. Over the past decade in the region, Abu Obeida led the creation of Windows Content Services for the Middle East and Africa and played a pivotal role in establishing Hunger Station's tech hub in Dubai, driving a remarkable doubling of Hunger Station GMV, making it the fastest growing brand and a delivery hero. Most recently, he supported Tuig, the Saudi digital wallet, in its acquisition by Tabi. Currently, he is exploring opportunities to further contribute to the ecosystem through a stealth startup initiative.
How did you start with product management?
Well, I started with product management is a very interesting story. Just some context. I am originally from Lebanon. I grew up in Saudi. And as a child in Saudi, things were very simple. Alhamdulillah, things were very beautiful. We barely got a phone, I think, in the last 2 years when I was living in Saudi. But in the last year, I think in the last 8 months, I met the internet. Okay, I remember yahoo.com and seeing the directories over there. And it kind of opened a question in my head that what can you do with this? My dad, when he's an engineer, biomedical engineer, when he introduced computers to us, to me and my brother, he said, this computer could do anything you want. Tell it to kill, it will kill. Kill it to fly, it will fly. Tell it to play, it will play. I'm like, wow, really? So when I saw the internet, I was like, what is this? And then we moved to Canada, okay? Now in Canada, what I saw over there was, from a physical perspective, things were kind of simpler than Saudi, okay, in terms of the construction, the architecture. We really missed Saudi at that time. But then I started realizing the productivity, okay? And then in university, I learned the economic terminology for it, right? The society's productivity is capital and labor and technology. Technology kind of amplifies people's productivity. And that's what I saw with myself and my family, paying bills online, researching online, getting things done online, when the internet was still very basic, okay? So when I went to university, I had my mind set. I want to go into computer science. I love this field. It's very interesting. I want to help grow my society through it. But at the same time, I want to come back to the Middle East. That was very important to me and my family. But I felt that, I don't see tech companies. And the only thing we knew was Sakhar at the time back in Saudi. So I figured maybe, once I graduate, do something engineering. And then in 2007, I visited Lebanon. And I was very keen to come back to the region overall and see what's happening. But at the same time, I realized there's no engineering companies over here, no tech companies over here. Now, my personal experience when I graduated from university, I did a lot of interesting internships. I worked at Sun Microsystems. I worked at a company called Citraka, building Java developer tools to measure concurrency, deadlocks, and a few other companies that were working on hardware and technology at the same time. Now, in those companies, I learned how technology can be really amazing and how advanced it really is. And I felt that, obviously we're missing that in our countries. So when I eventually graduated and moved, the first job I actually had in Canada before I moved to the States was a software encryption company. And they were building encryption for the National Security Agency of the US government. They would provide encrypted chat solutions. They would provide encryptions for storage systems. And they were very unique. They had only one customer, just like the federal government. And their contract was ending. Their 20-year contract was ending with the government. And they needed to package it into a new product for the mass market. And they failed. So to me, that was the first failure. And I'll talk about a lot of failures I run into where you have the technology, you have the capital, you have management, but something is missing. Okay, and I still at the time didn't know necessarily product management. I got into Microsoft Windows Vista and understood it was chaos. I mean, Vista was a major disaster for Microsoft. And it took me, of course, a while to see that because to me, Microsoft was heaven for a developer. But then it was really my visit to Lebanon and seeing the region over here in 2007 that, okay, there's no real engineering jobs over here. At least that was my impression. And I needed to move into marketing. The closest in my mind was marketing. So I started a 8-month hunt within Microsoft to move from engineering into program management. And in that process, I had 20 informational interviews. We call them informational interviews. You met a manager, you tell them this is what I'm about. Do you have a role in your team? And please, give me a chance to do the official interview. And I got rejected from all of them. Okay, all 20 information interviews. So there was Microsoft Zune trying to compete with the iPod. Not a good chance. The Microsoft Surface, where the desk was actually a computer. SQL team, a bunch of different teams. But then the last one gave me a chance onto a position within the .NET team that was focused on open source. And at the same month, I started also an MBA at the University of Washington, because in my mind, okay, I have to learn marketing. This is what will eventually take me back there. So that was my first kind of introduction into my real kind of way of getting into product management. I also remember I took a day off work from Microsoft. I took a day of vacation, and then I snuck into the training facility they had. And they had a training for new PMs who were actually PMs. I wasn't a PM at the time. Okay, I was an engineer. But I snuck in the back of the class just to see what they're talking about, what they're doing, and learn the basics to help me with the actual interview. And within Microsoft, you still have to do full interviews to actually get into product management. And that was my introduction. That's how I got in back in 2008.
As an engineer, why did you decide that marketing is an important skill to have for you to jump into program management?
I mean, to be honest, that's what I thought was needed to move back to the Middle East. I mean, to be really frank, I had a very basic goal. Join a multinational company that can relocate me to the Middle East. But also at the same time, I didn't think there's engineering jobs back then over here.
How did you get into Microsoft in the first place? Getting an engineering job in Microsoft is not an easy task.
Now, back then, at the University of Waterloo, most of their top graduates go to Microsoft, right? And it was funny because I didn't think I would be able to make it. And now, at the end of my study at Waterloo, I actually applied for Microsoft. And I had a phone interview with someone who actually... it was an initial phone interview, then he flew into the campus. And I remember I messed up the interview so bad. He was an Arab guy, actually, by the way. I forgot his name, but he gave me a book called Code Complete. And he's like, study this book, and then maybe you'll have a better chance next time. And at the same time, I applied for a job in Toronto, and that was the encryption company that I applied for and got in. Now, funny enough, it turned out that he actually recommended me for the full interview, although he turned me down within the interview. But I guess he was really nice trying to help me out. So he arranged for the interview. Eventually I found out I do have an interview after I already have accepted the other job, moved my family, signed the lease. And in my mind, I was like, khalas, my family, my in-laws are all in Toronto. There's no way I move to the US. Embarrassing to admit, but I actually had that first interview with no intention of going to Microsoft. I didn't prepare. I said, it's a free flight. Let me go enjoy the trip, meet my friends over there in Seattle. So I flew down to Microsoft, and I was very impressed. They rented like a mini villa, actually. It was like a townhouse, and they rented me a car, and it was a very pampering experience. And I have to admit, I wasn't ready for it. And during the interview, they killed me. It was a very tough interview. I was just sweating, and I just was not ready for it. Anyways, obviously I got rejected, and I continued with that, encryption company software. And then 6 months later, they went bankrupt. So I called Microsoft up. I had actually want to come back. Okay. Of course, I was pretty young at the time, so I was trying to make my own decisions, and the best way I saw was possible at the time. Now, they told me that you can't come back for an interview, okay, because of how bad I did in the first interview. But then, subhanAllah, lucky enough, another recruiter from Microsoft reached out to me, and I already discovered that they had two databases, one for new grads and one for industry hires. Okay, so the new grad database had me on the blacklist, okay? But then this guy from the industry hire reached out to me and said, would you like to come in? And I was like, of course I would. And I studied like crazy. That was the only time in my life I actually drank a Monster energy drink. And I studied like crazy. And alhamdulillah, I went down there. I interviewed for Windows Sustain Engineering, which basically does the Windows updates. But then throughout the interview, alhamdulillah, we had a very good chance to meet the actual platform team. And then they were very interested, and then they gave me the chance to join them.
That's such an interesting story. So they blacklisted you from the new graduate, but you were able, by the mercy of God, to go through the industry hires.
Yes. And again, this is one of the many things you'll see in life where I remember back at Microsoft, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer would come and say, guys, we did a lot of things great, but also was luck. Okay, not everything in life is perfectly planned, right? Luck plays a factor, and I was lucky to get in that time.
And how was the culture of being an engineer at Microsoft?
I mean, to me, as someone coming in, was very fascinating. Okay, but actually, in my first job, I was paired with someone who was a principal dev, and people told me this guy's a genius. No one tells him what to do. Neither his manager or the VP. He just invents his own projects and he does whatever he wants to do. And it was actually really interesting because what he did, and he was kind of a role model for a lot of engineers over there. And I think a lot of people are similar to him. He invented something called binary delta compression. Okay. If you remember back then, Windows Vista XP, you'd download this mega huge service pack, right? So he invented a technology where you could take two binaries, user32.dll, the new one and the old one, and figure out the delta between them, the binary delta, and then compress just the delta. And then you could download it in your machine and patch it to your old user32.dll instead of downloading the whole new file. And with that, he saved the company hundreds of millions of dollars on a monthly basis for the Windows updates. So to me, that's the role model. Okay, as a young guy coming in, and literally you walk in the halls over there, you'll find a lot of people with patents, sitting on their desks. Some of them have like 20, 30 patents, right? So to me, that was real hardcore engineering, right? And that's something I've missed quite a bit since then. But of course, it's different areas, different fields. And honestly, to be very honest, for me, I felt I couldn't compete with that. And I think in the back of my mind, that was partly why I wanted to also get into product management. Okay, I was more interested in people and making things happen as teams. But I heard this one guy, he was also an engineer on Windows. In his spare time at night, he would build a different operating system. Okay. Okay. I was like, no, I can't compete with this guy. Okay. I mean, I wanted to be reasonable. I still wanted to have a life, And my first, few months, of course, I used to work till late. But then, and it's a different topic about, work-life balance and what's reasonable to aim for. What do you think you'd be really good at? I felt that I cannot compete as an engineer over there.
Then you moved to program management. What are the softwares or the product that you worked on?
So I worked on .NET Windows Communication Foundation, okay, which is a library. And the part of it that I was really focused on was the SOAP-based web services. My manager's manager actually was a co-inventor of XML. And he told me the story that him and three guys, okay, who came to Microsoft, he actually blasted Internet Explorer in some way. He's French-Lebanese, by the way. And Bill Gates told him, fine, come and fix it. Show us what you could do. So he came to Microsoft and he gave him a very large scope. So he invented kind of things that with other people that eventually came Windows Communication Foundation. Now, this team was responsible for the open source strategy of .NET and also compliance with standards, which at the time was called really interoperability. So you have Microsoft Windows Communication Foundation talking to Oracle WebLogic, IBM WebSphere, Apache WSO2. These are all stacks implementing the same standard of SOAP-based web services, okay, which is essentially XML, right? So my job was half tester, half PM, was to create solutions and that would test and ensure that everything complies together. And on a quarterly basis, our COO would collect all the CTOs of the big Fortune 500 companies, American Express, Boeing, Bank of America, and they would come and we would prepare slides for them to show them that, okay, we tested against the standard, and this is how compliant we are or not. And eventually this team actually, I had this amazing manager called Paul Cotton. He was the Microsoft representative to W3C to define the emergent HTML5 standard. Google was taking a big lead on it, and Apple and IBM had concerns, and they wanted Microsoft to kind of have an alliance with them to all jump together into the W3C committees to specify the HTML5 standard and make sure it's not too much favoring the kind of the Google stack. So as a team for 4 years, basically, we were getting different basically standards and open source technologies working on the Microsoft stack or changing the Microsoft stack, like in this case, IE and also Windows Phone to work with these standards.
Did you actually meet Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates at that time? Do you have any memories of them?
There were several things that kind of stuck in my mind back then. Okay. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm talking as a young guy who's, learning and observing, and I really enjoyed that. And I definitely recommend for young people to work under very strong managers or strong cultures and understand how the bar can be really high. Now, Bill Gates, what I found interesting about him and the multiple kind of presentations he used to, obviously do it as a company, and some of them were even smaller. He didn't talk about the latest feature at Windows or the latest version of Office and how much money it's making. He was always talking about the power of software, how software can change the world. And you look at him, you tell he's not, he's a Windows guy, but he's really a software guy. He really cares about software dominating the world and changing the world. So that kind of sets the bar that we all care about software. Okay, we all care about the product. And that's one of the things I observe over here is that the product guy is the product guy here and the companies over here. But back then at Microsoft, when we had, for example, the Windows Phone SDK coming out, I kid you not, the finance guy would play with the Windows Phone SDK more than I had time to play with it. And he would come and present to the Windows Phone engineering team, the guys, I built this few apps and games. The API over here could be better. I don't like this library. The performance, I don't know what. He's a finance guy, business graduate, right? So that culture, that thinking, that mindset, I think was very much led by Bill Gates, that we care about the software and how it works within the world. Ballmer, of course, was a bit different. Okay, he was more of a really solid business guy. And people, of course, fault him for not enough innovation and missing the cloud and the phone. But the guy definitely had his, I think, strengths that he played very well to the company. The one thing that I think he did was the most impactful for the company, again, from a culture perspective. Windows Vista was a disaster for many reasons. Over-engineered, management wasn't great. Steven Sinofsky was moved from Office to Windows, to fix Windows. And with Windows 7, he had a very amazing, great product. And people were very thrilled. And it was understood that Sinofsky will be the replacement for Ballmer as a CEO of the company. But Sinofsky also was known to be very combative. Okay, there was a lot of politics. And then later on was found out that he killed the first kind of tablet, let's say, that Microsoft was working on. And then eventually Apple had the iPad, of course. But Ballmer, one of the key decisions he made was to actually fire Sinofsky. Okay, everyone expected this guy will take over Microsoft and run it after Ballmer, but he made a decision that this guy was not good for the culture. It was a clear 90-degree shift that, okay, the culture is getting too competitive, too combative. There was a famous chart that was going on the internet back then that if you look at the org charts of different companies, like Facebook is one big circle, Mark Zuckerberg is in the middle. Microsoft is an org chart with everyone holding guns against other teams. Okay, very competitive, very bloody. Okay, but Ballmer recognized that and wanted to change it, and that's why his decision was a vote for a different culture that eventually became Satya Nadella and all the changes he brought in.
So you're saying back in Microsoft, teams used to compete against each other?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's what Steve Ballmer used to do.
I mean, that was, I think, from the DNA of Bill Gates. It was a very tough culture where if someone is not smart, they'll get yelled at. It was very common to see yelling in meetings. Okay. Oh, yeah.
No way.
Oh, yeah. Very common. Okay. But then he's still professional. Like you talk about people who are very passionate about whatever they're building and they want to build it the right way. And from an engineering perspective, they believe it should be built this way, right? And they'll have essays written and fights and, pushing their point of view. All intellectual, of course, nothing really personal. But that was the culture back then, right? And again, this is pre-AB experimentation. See, the problem with the culture back then was that Microsoft hired really smart people. But then that was their downfall. And that's why eventually I left to Amazon, which is that the engineers believe that we know what's good for the world. We'll build it. The world will catch up. They don't get it. Eventually the world will catch up to us. And then you had this common saying that Microsoft had to build something 3 times to get it right. And that's why me personally, again, I learned so much and it was really great in all many levels. But then as I started my product role, I also started my MBA, my evening MBA. And I was learning about how other companies build products, okay? And I was yearning for this kind of customer first, customer obsessed. I mean, that was definitely not the language within Microsoft at the time. And that eventually was, my main reason for moving to Amazon.
And how did you move to Amazon?
I mean, during my MBA, I was kind of 4 years stretched out. They used to approach me every year. But I had no interest in moving. But then I would do the interviews, practice, kind of know what they're looking for, get a feeling, right? Because they're very peculiar in their interviews. And then when the 4 years were done, I was ready to move and they approached me again. And of course, back then things were very competitive and Amazon was stealing a lot of people from Microsoft. And the VP that I joined at Amazon was also ex-Microsoft, right? Windows VP. And the story that actually relevant, I think, from a career perspective to a lot of people here is I was very open going to my VP at Microsoft and told him, Amazon is talking to me. Should I join them? And he actually was, he's Palestinian, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And he told me a very good story that, do whatever is good for you. Okay. And I told him I wanted to come back over here. And he had some, different, advice of how to make it back over here eventually. But my direct management as well also were pro the move. They said, if you think it's good for you, do the move. Why not? Because if you leave and you're actually good, either you'll think well of Microsoft to potentially be a customer to Microsoft, or you'll go learn and you'll come back and be a better employee for Microsoft. Okay, and this is exactly what my manager told me, Paul Cotton. Yeah, it was an easy move to move there because I was building something very similar. I joined their Kindle team as the sole product manager, building their developer products. Okay, so they had the Fire tablet, which got a big success in America. The Fire TV streaming device, which was 1% of our thinking at the time, but then became a big success. But the main focus was on the Fire phone. Okay, and that's the project I joined among the other projects, but really focused on the developer tools for the Fire phone. Now, the Fire phone had 6 cameras. Okay, it would track your eyes and give you kind of a 3D perspective. Now, this was, I think, the second or the third major failure of product in my career, in the sense that it was very creative, very advanced kind of technology. And everyone in the team was thinking that, either we just don't get the genius of Bezos over here, we're missing something, or we're really screwed, okay? And it was very tough to prove the value of the 3D imagery in the phone. Now, the process was decent. And again, there's a lot of things done very well over there. But that particular project was overly ambitious. But I learned from it that, it's actually very important to push the envelope. Okay, I remember my manager told me that, we might fail. But if we fail, we learn from it and we'll figure something else. And eventually, Alexa came out of that project. Most of the people on my team moved on to Alexa after I left Amazon. It was similar, again, building developer tools and winning over third-party app developers into the Amazon ecosystem.
Did you guys have the 16 principles over there or no?
The what?
This is the 16 leadership principles that Amazon have that?
Yeah.
And did you interview on those 16 leadership interviews?
Actually, I have a very good story about that, by the way.
Yeah, please share it.
So I was like a sponge learning. And I think that's very important for someone in their 20s and even 30s, and always actually to really just soak in and admit you don't know things and learn. One of the things I found fascinating at Amazon, immediately going over there, and again, this is a major generalization, but again, it's one man's perspective. The engineers at Microsoft, at least at the time, were the ones I used to work with, had a very high IQ, building, again, operating systems and whatnot. When I went to Amazon, it was more of a junior team, right? And it felt like the engineering weren't as capable as the ones at Microsoft, but also they weren't as empowered, to be really honest, okay? In the sense that the product manager had the full power of controlling anything in a project back at Amazon. Even to the point like we were building developer tools, and the developers, of course, want to have test machines, okay? So my VP would tell me, you got to make sure that you as a PM, you choose the test machines. I'm like, why would I choose the test machines for the engineers? It's their thing to play with, right? They decide what they want to test on. He's like, no. You know the customer. Your customer is a developer, okay? Like Candy Crush or Al Jazeera or ESPN, all those apps that are being built on the Amazon devices. You need to know those developers and what test machines they have so that your developers have the same test machines. So it was understood that the product manager had, full control over things. Now, there are quite a few differences, right? I mean, at Amazon, the product manager typically comes from a business school by the time I did finish my business school. But also, they are very much less on the technical side, right? Which, by the way, is perfectly fine because it doesn't hold them back from thinking about design and implementation. And that's the problem I still have today. Sometimes when I think of a solution, I'm thinking, how does it get built? What's it real technical cost? But an English major who becomes a product manager is not burdened by that thinking, okay? So we had some really great PMs working on Amazon App Store. And by the way, on LinkedIn right now, you would see Ethan Evans. He was the VP at the time of the App Store. Okay, he was the App Store VP. I was in the team that was actually responsible for the kind of the Fire OS, Kindle OS, and the tools over there. So I used to work with his team quite a bit. His team, he had this guy who was a NASCAR racer, ex-military, English major, right? Or people who are pure finance. There's one guy who was building the developer portal where you submit the apps. And eventually he got bored of the work. He went out to become an investment banker after that, just because his background was just pure MBA, okay? So the process at Amazon, to me, was very incredible because there was no religion to push in terms of the technical solution. At Microsoft back then, it was, of course, .NET, of course, Windows Server, of course, Windows. But the Amazon folks didn't have that dogma. It's like, whatever the customer needs, we'll build it. Nothing more, nothing less. If it works with duct tape, we'll build it with duct tape, right? Very focused on the customer. And then we had this conference, AWS reInvent. And what struck me over there was that half the presentations were actually customers presenting how they use the technology and how they build the technology. So again, their processes and formulas were much more, customized to the user in terms of discovering the user, understanding the user, and not wasting time in terms of very grand visions. Now, the other thing I learned over there, which was kind of maybe religion for them, but also I really bought into it, was the idea of writing. Writing became really my thing at Amazon. And it was very interesting because I grew up in Saudi. I never took an English course. We used to speak English a bit at home, but never really studied English properly. Even university in Canada didn't study English. So writing was a bit of a challenge for me, but over time with emails at Amazon, it became kind of the place to really hone business writing. And that's a skill I carried all the way over here in my future roles.
After your stint in Amazon, you decided to go back to Microsoft?
So I was more about coming back to the Middle East. Okay. So I ran into this opportunity that Microsoft had. It was actually funny because it was posted in LinkedIn. I remember I applied 11 p.m. at night, no wasta, no connection, no nothing. Just applied with a resume like any guy from the street. And the resume had some typos, but the hiring manager was British, based in the UK. Okay. And I wanted to move back, right? It was really important for me when my kids grew up in America that I want them to grow up here in the Middle East. And the interview process was actually quite tough. It was 7 interviews over 2 months. And it was very interesting because, I was already at Microsoft, I already had my good reviews and why we're doing this. But that's just the process, okay? And the last interview was quite tough as well because the question was, you have a building of 40 floors. How many elevators do you need? Okay. And I'm like trying to do math, standing over there for 15 minutes. But yeah, the reason was really from a personal perspective to move back to the Middle East. And again, this is something that I discuss quite a bit with my team when I hire people that, you have your career and personal goals and everything requires sacrifice. And at that time, I was a senior PM at Amazon. Joining Microsoft Dubai, I joined as a PM2. Okay, so I took a level down, right? And I found a lot of people have trouble accepting that when they move roles. And I tell them, guys, if there's a goal you're working towards, it's perfectly normal, okay? And what happens, that positions you really well to start growing all over again. So from that perspective, it was an easy decision. But also at the same time, it was a complete shift, okay? Moving from a place where they're building really grand, difficult products, but still run into crisis after crisis, okay? Like Windows Vista was a big issue. Windows 7 was great. Windows 8, not so much. Amazon Fire Phone was a major disaster. Everything else was kind of fairly decent. And then coming to the Middle East to join Microsoft over here, my key challenge was the people part, okay? It wasn't really the technology. It wasn't really the business itself, right? I joined MSN, which was the content or the consumer service part of Microsoft, and especially within Windows. And there was a major rebooting of the program happening over there. But the challenge I had was working with a different work culture, different ways of thinking and working, people not as comfortable writing emails, people are not comfortable challenging management. Like challenging management in Seattle was very common. My first month in Microsoft, when I joined them, I remember they were changing the compensation model, okay? And PUM or GM, product unit manager, but he was really like a GM, got us all into a room. Of course, I'm a new guy, first month on the job. And he's like, guys, we're changing the way we do reviews. FYI, this is how things are working out right now. This is what we're considering. I remember one senior engineer would tell him, listen, whatever decisions you guys make will change or screw up the choice of schools I can send my kids to, private schools. He's like, you guys don't screw up the compensation. And the manager's like, yeah, for sure, don't worry, because they're worried about the split between stock and cash and bonuses and reviews. So that, to me, that was something I would never forget, how that senior engineer was holding the GM accountable. Make sure you give them this feedback. Don't screw up our thing or we're going to leave. Okay? But the team I joined back in Microsoft here in Dubai, I think this wasn't used to that way of working with management in the UK or management in Seattle. And honestly, it felt like joining a different company. It took a while to kind of redefine the culture to work in a way that I think is more in line with the Seattle culture?
I have so many questions. So first, my first question is, I was a software engineer who transitioned into product management, and I always thought of it being a strength or superpower that make me different from other product manager. But how, in your opinion, can this, it's a weakness, having a technical background, but having a technical background as a product manager?
I think every superpower has a shadow, right? In this particular case, and I feel it again until now, is that you get too consumed into the technical details. I was a PM at Amazon building a technical solution, was actually a plugin for Eclipse. Okay, the SDK manager. We're building the Amazon version of the SDK manager. And I'm writing the spec and getting all excited how it could work out and writing implementation details. And I took it to my engineering manager for review. And he literally or virtually slapped my hand at, you don't think about design. That's not your job anymore. You tell us how the feature works. And we as an engineering team will figure out how it works. Don't get into our area. He didn't mean it in a political way. He meant it as in you're distracting yourself. Go understand the customer. Get us, where's the data? Show me the data. This is the right way of doing it. I'm like, I don't know. This is just, I'm an engineer. I think this is the best way of doing it. And he's like, nope, where's the data? Give me data. And I'm thinking, okay, how can you get data on an SDK manager plugin for Eclipse? And then I went back and then started speaking to developers within Amazon. It wasn't a really big feature, but anyways, we did usability studies with developers. How would you like the plugin to be designed? How would you use it? What problems do you have with it? Managing, forgot the term right now, but the images of Android and how to download them, AVD manager and things like that. But that's what the feedback from the engineering manager was, that you think of the experience and validate it. Don't get into the design part. And now when you think of new things, you could be burdened by the cost of, what would it take to estimate building this? And in many cases, it'll be outdated anyhow. Okay, now I'm playing with a lot of AI tools. Engineers right now have a very different perspective on how things are built right now than a year ago. Right? And it's not your job to tell them how it gets built. You need to learn from them and have that obviously cooperative relationship. So for me, it was different moments where I learned that, khalas, I'm not an engineer. That's an old thing. It's a great discipline, but I need to focus on different skills.
Absolutely. And it took me sometimes for me to get used to it at the same time. My next question is, you worked in the West and they have a different understanding what a product manager is. And how was the culture shock when you work as a product manager here in the UAE?
Of how product is very commercial. And again, there's a lot of commercial driven products over here, but there's a difference in, I think, the risk appetite between American management and especially West Coast companies than the, let's say, very average generic, European approach to technology, right? Again, the products I worked on over there were very ambitious, very grand, very, thinking of very big things. And failing and accepting that failure. Okay, nothing really wrong about that. Now things have changed since then till now in terms of the terminology. There's a lot of terminology in product right now. Research jobs, jobs to be done or whatever it's called. I haven't known what it is, but the mindset was that we're building great products and we'll do whatever it takes to get there. Okay, and if we fail, it's perfectly fine, right? Using whatever tool needed. Okay, here in the Middle East, I felt that there's a lot of conservative approach to building products. Either, it's very driven by commercial, or just copy the competition, or do what's proven to be true, and not much major appetite to do heavy research to figure out something truly unique. Research is a major discipline, by the way, and designers, when empowered, they could do really great things. And we've seen that happen actually with many features we've built in the last few years, the different teams that I was on. But the level of space for them to truly explore grand things is not really there. Okay. And then the product role becomes really shrunk to the product person. The product person is not the engineer. The engineer does what he's told. He just builds. He's responsible for the, how to build and when to build, but he's not really involved in what to build and why. It's really the product guy. And same goes for commercial. They tell the product guy, you figure a solution. But if they're convinced of a solution, they'll, of course, dictate the solution to the product guy. So the product guy is confused. Should I really come up with a solution or should I wait to be told what the solution is? Okay. So that kind of limits, I think, the role of product a bit over here. Again, there's a lot of copycat businesses here in the Middle East where, things have worked abroad and we're rebuilding them over here. And I think it's a natural phase for, product and tech companies to go through while they're still trying to develop this capability, right? But even in this way, you could build it in a data-driven way, or you could build it without any data, just, following, the executive's opinion, right? And I think there's different companies that do this quite differently. But overall, there's still I think, a large, phase to go through in terms of empowerment to product to truly research things and then share the responsibility with everyone, right? It's not just the product's responsibility. The same way it's not just the engineering team to do, security, for example, right? Everyone in the company should be obsessed with it, that everyone should understand the language of how features are built.
You ended up becoming the CPO of Hunger Station. Do you mind just sharing a little bit what is Hunger Station?
So it's actually interesting because when I got the email, I was like, what is Hunger Station? Is there a company really called Hunger Station? But no, Hunger Station, of course, is a very successful company, a very commercially sound company. I think one of the most profitable food delivery companies in the world. Based in Saudi, of course, focused in the Saudi market, created by a very ambitious, entrepreneur over 10 years ago, Ibrahim Al-Jassim. And I mean, it's a very long story how they got built and how they evolved and what changed with them. But essentially, they're like Talabat's sister company in Saudi, and of course, along with Talabat and many other brands owned by Delivery Hero.
Did you feel any imposter syndrome going from your position at Microsoft to being a CPO of a big company like Hunger Station?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is a very good question, actually. I'm glad you asked it because I think it's very important to share with people, beside the shiny stories, the backstories that goes in people's mind and how they eventually get there, okay? At Microsoft, I was managing a very, very small team, actually 1 PM, okay? And there was moments where the sister team that we had, an editorial team, sometimes they had a manager, sometimes they didn't have a manager, so it kind of managed the team as well. But it was essentially really one product manager. And then I got hired as a VP, actually, into Hunger Station, not a CPO. Eventually became a CPO. But the mandate was to build a tech hub here in Dubai, 120 people, along with a CTO. And build a fairly large product team, okay? And it eventually became 44 people in the product team between product design, research, analytics, right? And to me, it was very daunting because managing one person, then managing a whole team in a different domain, in a different country, and a different business model was, massively different, right? And I remember talking to some friends back then, like, guys, what should be the formula for going to this setup? Of course, coming from Microsoft, there's a brand name. People always care about the brand name. But I mean, the brand name will not do the work, right? You have to do the work. And the formula was very simple, okay? That I remember I came in and saying that, guys, I know nothing about food delivery. Yes, I worked at Amazon, but I actually don't know anything about e-commerce because I worked on devices. I worked on operating systems and SDKs, not the actual consumer experience, even of Kindle, by the way. Okay, I was working in a developer experience. So I came in and told the team, guys, I really, don't know any of this stuff. Even mobile apps, yeah, we built some in Microsoft. And I remember one guy went to the CEO the first week and told him, why you guys, bring this guy over here. What is he doing over here? Okay. But I think there was a recognition that, there's some very core DNA material that I could bring and inject into this team and help build, a bigger team and kind of redefine the product culture into a way that the business really needed. Okay. Again, the business was already successful from a commercial perspective, but the product was very basic, I needed a massive improvement. And then, I came in with a mindset that, guys, I don't know your domain. You will tell me about your domain. But what I'll tell you is how great product teams are built. And I was very clear with everyone that the product I build and sit down and write the specs and do A/B experiments and measure results, the product I'm building is the culture. Okay, the culture is what really matters. Okay, what are the ingredients that forms the culture? How to hire people, what to expect in terms of hiring them, what's the hiring process. We were super detailed about that. Okay. And then in terms of how to set expectations, how to plan, how to communicate, a lot of process work kind of over there that was very critical to set the new culture of how the team would work, regardless of what the actual feature will come out. Okay, I'm not responsible for the feature that comes out. This is the actual PM who's doing all the work along with his engineering manager. Maybe he originated the idea, maybe a commercial guy originated the idea, maybe we just copied the idea. But the question is, what is this culture that can produce it in the most validated, proper way, where everyone is motivated to come up with the best solution, right? That I was very comfortable. That's my responsibility. But other than that, yeah, it felt very much, the imposter syndrome is real, okay? When you don't know how to manage a new discipline like design, that was very new to me to manage it. Same with product analytics, didn't manage it before. But you admit to the guys, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. Let's have the conversation, and you educate me in what it really success looks like over here, and accept and be willing to get it wrong the first few times till eventually get the hang of things.
I'm curious, how did you get the CPO position?
Well, alhamdulillah, it was just, impact for the team, and the team doing really great work, and, recognition from everyone that, we have a very new product culture and things are doing really well. And there was a lot of, I think, eyes kind of observing what's happening. You had, of course, the engineering team, you had the C-level, you had the DH C-level as well. And interesting enough, also the competition. Okay. Talking to the CEO that, your product is changing quite a bit. What's going on over here? But it takes time to get there, right? I remember literally someone was telling me in the second month in the job that, hey, we didn't see much, nothing has changed so much, like what's going on. And I'm like, hey, we're still laying the groundwork for how the culture is going to change, right? And I don't know how it's going to look like 100 days from now, but you do what you believe is right and trust the results eventually will come.
What's your take on internship?
So internships is, I think, one of the missed opportunities here in the Middle East.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Waterloo, I did 6 internships, which is 6 times 4. Each internship is like 4 months. So that's 24 months of internship, paid, of course, right? My first internship was January 2020. And the company was building, believe it or not, the first metaverse. Okay, it was actually a 3D world where people go in and chat and do things. And I was responsible for building, somehow they got a contract to build a Kia.ca website, okay? But all the internships were real work, real pay. And of course, you get to observe how people work, how decisions are made. And I was lucky enough to work in a few Canadian companies that were among the best managed private companies in Canada. So you get to learn what's, good management from the founders and your direct managers and whatnot. Now, of course, there were other people who who did their internships at bigger companies and actually delivered real impactful software as well, for a relatively cheap cost, right? And over here, I think we pushed to have interns within Hungerstation, and we had some decent interns. But the culture about expecting, what to expect out of them and how to support them, is not very common over here, right? And I think they could definitely help with quite a bit of, not just manual things, but real things that they can handle and be given real responsibility, and ultimately becomes the best way to filter through interns and hire full-time employees out of them.
And what do you think about the junior product position?
Sounds like a trick question, but yes, I don't think someone graduating without any experience can be a very effective junior PM, okay? Again, depending on the product perhaps, but what I've seen at Microsoft, we had people like that, and I think they struggled to earn the credibility with engineers. Either you know the user or the domain or the technology, and if you don't any of them, it'll be a bit hard to kind of build that muscle to be convincing and credible with the engineering team. Now, of course, I was working a very technical product, so, back at Microsoft, so the PMs were mostly, again, from a technical background. But even the MBAs at Amazon, okay, they were, very experienced people in different fields, right? They had their own experience, right? They didn't just graduate fresh. And through the MBA, they learned, again, more skill sets, and they're able to do more things. But I think, like my own daughter right now, she's in university doing computer science. She needs to go through, for example, the pain of building a product, understanding, how engineers need to make very difficult choices, how releasing software looks like just the normal software cycle, really, before becoming in a position where you're in a driving seat deciding what features gets built.
How to hire good product managers?
There are different philosophies, of course, but I think you need a very high bar in terms of... my preference is case studies within the interview. Okay, not giving someone homework and asking him to, asking the poor guy to spend 30 hours building a PowerPoint presentation. But you come to the interview, and within the interview, you have a very well thought out case. So, for example, at Hungerstation, we had 3-4 cases that were floating between us as hiring managers, and we would try to make sure to have 2 cases given to the candidate throughout the interview process, right? So there's actually two things. On the hard skills part, you have the cases to see how the person can develop a product from scratch. And usually have very hairy problems that you give them, and you see how they handle the pressure during the interview. But then also, of course, a PM has to have very good soft skills. Okay, and part of it are things that are, I think, Amazon codified really well in their interview process. Like, for example, customer obsession. Being able to influence, okay, that's also a very common Microsoft thing, influence without authority. So what happens, at least over here, I think a lot of interviews are very superficial. What's needed is to go really deep with the candidate, understand, the experience he's had, and understand their way of thinking and going through that experience. What they learned, do they admit they could have done it in a better way? Are they reflective enough of their experience? And asking for real proof about the skills that you're interviewing for. I think really the key thing is not a particular question, but the interview loop being designed in a way to test for different things and flush out any red flags. And actually, there was something about the Amazon culture that I found interesting, that the VP over there, the Microsoft VP, ex-Microsoft VP, he had a PM back at Microsoft that he really wanted to hire. And he recommended to the team, his own team, that, okay, interview this guy and hopefully we can hire him. And I remember I was shadowing the interview. I was into an interview with another senior PM manager, me and him and this guy. And then he answered everything perfectly well, but he had a bit of an attitude. So when the committee got together, the committee who interviewed this person decided that he is technically competent, but from an attitude or culture perspective, they didn't want the guy. Now, they told that to their boss, the VP, and the VP had to accept it because the process was designed in a way where it's a committee deciding whether the person is fit or not. It's not just the hiring manager making his own decisions. So, for example, at Hungry Station, we started with the hiring manager making the ultimate decision, right? But then as we try to become more refined about interviewing process, we went to the committee model, okay? So you're interviewing a designer. In the loop, you have, of course, the head of design, but then you have someone on the PM side and someone on the dev side. You interview in PMs, you'll have a developer also interviewing them. And it was very important to have the debriefing session at the end, where everyone comes with their opinion clearly stated. I'm voting for this person or not, and be willing to defend that decision. Okay, that requires leadership from that person's part, okay, that interviewer, to know how to advocate on your own opinion and not see what the boss really wants. And eventually have enough consensus to establish that the guy is a proper fit or not, right? That process was actually hard to introduce because you're asking the hiring manager to give up some of his authority and share it with the committee. So to me, really, these hiring practices are the ones that make the real difference.
And what are the red flags that you're looking for in the product interviews?
The first red flag is lack of customer obsession. If they're too lost in the technicalities, too lost in the features, but then thinking of the user and really clearly stating the user's problems and thinking about how they'll uncover those problems in a very clear, at least sophisticated way, that's obviously a major red flag, right? And then the soft skills are important, right? Because in a company, any culture that someone is coming into, one person can be successful in a culture, but not a very good fit for another culture, right? So you got to assess your culture very honestly and know what it needs, okay? And be able to bring it to that candidate in the way that you're assessing for. There's nothing necessarily wrong with him, but he has to be a fit to that particular culture and what it needs. Especially, for example, at Hungry Station, we were building the culture, right? We were building the team. So you wanted people who can influence the culture and have an opinion and shape it as well. Not just be very passive, going through the motions and not have an opinion about how things should be. People who are willing to speak up about this process is too long. Like, for example, we iterated the OKR process so many times, okay? But it needed active participation from the PMs. Come in and shape it with me. Tell me what you like, what you don't like about it, right? And be vocal. So that was a red flag in that stage for building the company in that particular period, right? It might not be as relevant in another phase, but at that time, that's what really mattered. And I think, within product as well, you have, some domain skills that matter, okay? But they're not as critical as the logic of working through a problem. And that's why, to me, the case studies are usually red flags and deal breakers if a candidate doesn't make it through it.
You mentioned customer centricity. How did you able to champion customer centricity in the company in general or in the product industry specifically?
Yeah, that's a very good question because in our case, Hungry Station was interesting because we were building the team from scratch. And there was a decision to build a tech hub here in Dubai, right? So in our hiring, we were very keen to hire people who are willing to travel to Saudi. And that's where the market is. That's where the user is, right? And organization doesn't deliver here in UAE. So that was very important. Everything could be perfectly fine, but if the candidate is not willing to travel on a regular basis to Saudi and meet the customer and do deliveries and sit down with the customer agents, then that wouldn't work. So that was a filtering process that was very deliberate in the hiring phase. Okay. And it did filter quite a bit of people, by the way. Now, once people joined, that was also a requirement during the performance review that basically, if you're not traveling enough, your review will suffer. And it did happen. And it happened to people who are very impactful, very important, very useful. It's just that you have to really connect with your customer, right? And it's an expectation that we have within the team. From a leadership perspective, there's one course I took in my MBA that, of course, there's tons of leadership theories, right? But there's one theory that we were exposed to that I found really relevant, that the leader is really responsible for setting the context. What happens in the room once you leave the room as a leader? Will people behave in the right way or not? Okay. And we're not talking necessarily just, sticks and carrots. We talk about how you as a leader specify how work gets done as a process. Okay. Very critical. In the case of what we had back in that team, you want to work on solving a problem. You had a feature to solve the problem. Well, first of all, define the problem. Where are the numbers? Where are the metrics? Have you done any interviews? For example, we tried to do weekly interviews, but then it was really taxing. Okay, the continuous discovery thing was too hard to do initially as we were building the team. Right? Some teams did it well for a while, but I mean, we had different challenges. That wasn't really the key focus or the right focus at the time. But ultimately, you need to be able to really reflect and explain the problem with the customer in mind and quantify it. Okay, there's both a financial part, but then the customer metrics. So setting the culture that, guys, we have to have data to discuss any problem was very important. And sometimes we would have, brutal conversations about, if I need to sort the list, I really need customer data. Obviously we need it. Okay, we had, and we had some good back and forth and things like that. But you need to set the context that tells people these are the behaviors we reward, and it truly gets rewarded in the review. And these are behaviors we will not reward. It could be about customer centricity, or it could be about collaboration with other teams, could be quality of communication, quality of writing, it could be a lot of things, of course. But it's having a very clear bar, telling people this is what we care about, and we will reward on that basis, tells people, okay, this is what we're all aiming to do together. And then with the feedback that the bar is too high at this point, let's relax it right now, maybe we come back to it in a quarter or two.
Recording an episode with Teresa Torres next year. And again, I'm a fan of continuous discovery, but I'm curious why it did not work in your case.
At the team, no, that time we were really small as a team.
Okay. And
the scope was huge and massive, and we had a lot to do. Didn't make sense to spend time on it. Then we didn't have research staff as well. The research function didn't exist. So we were rushing, we were jumping the gun, talking about capabilities that was just too soon to introduce. Okay. And not only just research, for example, A/B experimentation. It needs a certain infrastructure, needs a technical infrastructure, needs the right instrumentation in the code, needs people who can understand how to analyze the data that comes out of it. You need the right number and quality of analysts to make those decisions, right? You cannot just impose it that every experiment will be an A/B experiment from day one, right? So the same goes with customer research, right? You could do interviews on topics and domains, or you could do it on particular features, right? Well, if you're not doing it for the domain and you have a strategy for the domain, then it's kind of a little too early to do customer reviews on just a feature.
How can you separate the product teams for maximum productivity? So do you separate them based on certain metrics? Do you separate them based on a product, based on problems, based on certain technology? How do you distribute the teams?
So there's different philosophies. I think Reforge has a very good article on this that people could refer to. It talks about two axes. There's an axis of accountability. Are you going to hold the PM alone accountable, like what happens typically at Amazon? Or are you going to hold a committee of people or a group of people accountable? Right? So there's a question over there, number one. And number two, what are they actually accountable for? Is it just to build the feature, just as a feature factory, or for an actual business outcome, moving a business metric? Okay, the shareholder or the CEO will not care about a specific feature as much as he cares about a business metric moving, right? Whether it's business metric or consumer metric is the same. But the idea is that there's a number that you're moving. So is this single PM or the group of PMs or the group of, the product builders all put together, are they responsible for pumping the feature out? If so, then you will arrange by feature, by feature area, right? If they're responsible for more like business metric, let's say grocery or ads, you have ad tech, and grocery is a whole domain by itself. They can be standalone businesses in some respect, right? And they can have their own metrics, regardless of the features that are baked into it or not, right? Because something like groceries will have, vendor listings, will have search, will have detailed items. You can have a PM responsible for vendor listings as vendor listings, or you could have a PM responsible for groceries overall. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to have a mix of both. Okay, we kind of had a mix of both, right? You had PMs who were responsible for the business metrics of groceries, and then you had PMs responsible for the actual feature of vendor listings, right? So every company will be different, of course, but I think it's very important to, again, refer to this Reforge article and see the available 4 types of teams. And then the beautiful part over here is that gives you language to discuss with the stakeholders, like, guys, what kind of team do you guys really want over here? This is very important. And unfortunately, in some cases, there's mixed signals, hidden signals in the environment where you have to read and understand what needs to be done. But of course, when communication is open and clear, it's much easier to put on the table and say, guys, okay, this is not Amazon. The PM is not solely responsible, and therefore he's not that empowered. Let's just acknowledge that. But he's responsible along with a group of people. So basically commercial and engineering. And we will hold them all accountable together, right? That changes the language in terms of how communication happens and how decisions are made.
And as the number 1 product leader in Hunger Station, how do you set the product culture?
Well, it's a mixture of everything we discussed, really. I mean, at the time I was a leader, but then of course there are other leaders in the team with me, which is the direct team, but everyone has their contribution, right? You have the consumer side, you have the partner side, you have design, you have analytics, and you want to sit down with some clear principles about what kind of team you want, right? And this is where the hiring, the performance review, the not daily, but let's say weekly or sprint or monthly level of work happens in terms of communication and planning and engagement with stakeholders. As a team, you put that recipe together and be very clear about it and be willing to take feedback from them. Like, are we doing too much? Is it too much pressure? Should we slow something down? Should we introduce, more capabilities in a certain function? How to give clarity, what the team needs in terms of focus. All the other things that need to be put together by the leader, and the leader is ultimately responsible for it and validating it with all the stakeholders, right? And in some cases, there will be alignment on that, and that's when things will move really well and really fast. And sometimes there will be confusion. And when you have confusion, things will not move that fast, or they will move, but they won't be sustainable for the long term, right? In terms of people's, motivation or interest in the work.
Food deliveries are not profitable. What makes Hunger Station different?
I think it's not just only Hunger Station, to be honest. It's the region, right? There's different market dynamics over here, right? So overall, the delivery cost and therefore the delivery fee is, as a percentage of the basket, is highest over here compared to anywhere else in the world, right? But at the same time, gas is relatively cheaper. You have certain costs in terms of government regulations, in terms of, how the supply and of fleet and delivery should work. So there's a certain formula that basically works over here that's quite different from other regions, right? And then the market developed in a way where, at the end of the day, it's a convenient service, right? And convenience works obviously very well in the GCC, right? And from that perspective, most companies here are profitable, not just Hunger Station.
Marketplaces, they're very hard to build and even harder to scale. And one of the common problems that they have is marketplace quality. How can you maintain that you have a good restaurants and you remove the bad restaurants, the bad actors, and you have the good drivers and remove the bad drivers?
Well, it's a system of incentives and tools to measure quality. I think it has changed quite a bit. And I think there's a lot of challenges in measuring the NPS, of both riders and vendors and understanding what they're looking for. And again, there's different models, right? Hunger Station versus Talabat versus Jahez will have different value propositions to the restaurants. And that's why they exist, right? Starting from the commission model to the ad revenue and house setup to the frequency of payments. Okay. Mm-hmm. That makes quite a bit of difference for both the vendors and for riders, right? the frequency, the ease of payments. All these are tools that the commercial team ultimately will use to figure out what kind of bundle of service they want to give to their partners at a given time. And that will change. And also the regulations make a really big difference, right? The regulations can increase the cost of doing business or could reduce it, right? It can change the quality that you could give to riders. So for example, here in UAE, all the riders are uniformed, right? All the drivers are uniformed. But in Saudi, that's not necessarily the case. Okay, there's more regulation coming down about that and making it more required to have people properly uniformed, which of course makes a lot of sense. But it might not be necessarily the top priority for the business, right? The business might be focused on something else, but the regulation comes and puts that a bit higher in the priority list.
Amazon is a big writing culture, and it's famous where they have no PowerPoints and no presentations. They have those silent meetings. How did you take this culture of writing into, your leadership roles or into the rest of your career?
Well, you try different ways of introducing it. So when I left Amazon coming to Microsoft Dubai, I tried to do it initially and it wasn't kind of really welcome. But then I realized, okay, there are certain things that I work on, especially specs, that I could be very detailed about it. And those will be appreciated. Or a certain proposal for... I think a good product leader and any leader in general should look at both product innovation and also process innovation. How to improve the process of how decisions happen within the team, right? And when it comes to process changes, that's where writing makes a big difference, actually. Like, how else will you explain it, right? You need to explain the current process, the new process, the gaps, how to roll it out, what does it take to get there? And people will look at it, and if they're willing to be criticized as the author, they'll be more than happy to criticize. And say, okay, fine, I understand your full thinking right now. Let's discuss it, right? Most people appreciate that. I don't think people have an issue with that, right? So when I joined Hungerstation, they were thinking about how to write down the strategy, but that became very kind of convoluted and kind of difficult. But then there were areas like hiring, where writing down the hiring process became actually very helpful to help align people and then duplicate it across different functions. The typical spec, having a template for it, also helped a lot to make it easier for people to do the writing that was required, right? And even just normal communication, by the way, like giving status updates via emails, also actually was a very, very big thing. It's actually funny because in my first review at Hungerstation, and alhamdulillah, it was a very good review. I got exceeded actually. But the first line in my review was that you introduced a writing culture to Hungerstation. Okay. And it was very transformative, actually. It helped quite a bit. And then later on, when I joined Tuweg, also Tuweg had a lot of challenges, not necessarily from a product perspective, but from a company perspective. And the idea of taking a step back and writing out an assessment, writing out some recommendations, and using that as a launchpad for discussion with the founders and the leaders, also helped people to just take a breather and say, okay, this is how you see the problem. I see it maybe differently. Let's have a real discussion about it. And it gets filed as the view in that time because, our perspective changes from time to time, right? So you had a set of problems, you have a certain prescription and writing about it. You go in time, 2 months later, you look back like, oh, wow, that was true, but now we have something else. Okay, you update a document or you have a new document. And that's why at Microsoft they had this term, plan of record. What is the current plan right now when it comes to this topic? What is it we're trying to do, right? We're trying to grow, make money, win strategically. Guys, we need to align what is the thing that we're doing. And aligning people on assessing the problem is extremely important. I think ultimately by modeling how to do the writing, but then giving the team tools to help, do the writing in the way that's kind of required or helpful for everyone, and always getting feedback. Is this too much, too little? I think like with the strategy docs, for example, it was a bit lengthy. So we opted for something shorter later on. And then just seeing how people react to it.
What makes a good strategy doc?
At Hungerstation, I don't think we nailed it the way I wanted to nail it. Okay. But what we try to do at Hungerstation, kind of building it the Amazon style, again, this is my perspective. People can, of course, have very different perspectives about it. I think the key thing for me is the principles, the product principles that would govern this area. Not a particular feature decision, but what's the principle that we can always go back to and rely on that principle to break a tie when it comes to decision making or sort out a conflict in terms of the feature that we're actually building. So for example, in the developer products I was building at Amazon, there was a principle that whatever you do, don't risk delaying the consumer launch of the device. Christmas is coming. The Kindle Fire tablet has to be ready, a month or two before it. Nothing you could do should jeopardize that. Okay, don't come and argue that I need, to delay the feature a little bit or something. I don't know. This is a very key principle, right? In Hungry Station, in some cases, there was a perspective about, is it really about growth or about profitability? What are we really aiming for? And when you say growth, is it growth for a certain percentage or is it relative to the competition? What is it that you're really, really trying to do? Okay. So a good strategy doc will outline those principles, 4, 5, 6 of them, such that if someone sees it, he could accept whatever comes after it. Okay. And then within a particular domain, you have major strategic hurdles or problems that need to be solved eventually. And outlining those problems and what they are, and maybe some initial thinking, because of course you need a lot of discovery to figure out what is it that you're actually doing. But where do you want to be with this strategy, okay, down the line when you're solving these problems? And for us, we had some thinking, and I don't think we actually got the chance to implement it the way we really wanted to do it. There was a lot of challenges, but the intention of having a long-term plan, actually in some areas, really panned out very, very well, okay? Like search, how do you want search to evolve? How do you want ad tech to evolve, right? How do you want MarTech to evolve? These are issues that are not really any secrets. At the end of the day, you have your company, you look at the competition. Of course, within Delivery Hero, you have the advantage of seeing other companies, see where you stand. So it's fairly easy to kind of flesh out a very high level strategy to know where you're going to go. I think it becomes trickier when you're doing a brand new startup or when you're in a new domain and you're like, we could go either way. Listen to strategy and having a very deliberate debate about it becomes much more important at that point.
And how come product managers become better at strategy?
I think, not MBA, but business material is really important, right? Understanding finance, economics, understanding strategy, understanding, obviously the power of network effects, the power of a monopoly. Can you be a monopoly? Can you be a winner who takes all? All these strategic things that are not obviously, have nothing to do with features at a feature level, but thinking at that level of those topics, along with the commercial team or the founders, and being aligned on them. I think the more important thing is to be aligned on them, right? One is to have any explicit thinking about it, but then align the company on it, right? I mean, it's a disaster if you have obviously no strategy in one area and then a very clear strategy in another area, because, something like, again, groceries, you could say, hey, we want to do X and Y and Z. But if you're not aligned with the sales team, then you could build the best product in the world, but if no sales team to sell it to accounts, then it doesn't really matter, right? Your strategy could be wrong, but you want to be able to execute it if you're not aligned within the rest of the company. And I think this matters, of course, with bigger companies. But the part that I find personally challenging is, okay, this is execution. You could obviously sort out execution if you're just organized. The real debate comes when you have a difficult decision to make on a strategic level. Okay, do we build something that's so standalone, or do we involve partnerships to offer something? Do we think we have enough assets to offer something that's truly competitive, or we need some other ingredients, external ingredients, to offer that truly competitive advantage?
How to influence without authority? I know you mentioned a little bit about your experience at Microsoft, but what should a product manager do to influence engineers, design, research, the marketing, design, align upper stakeholders, speak to customers?
Well, it's a skill, obviously, right? It's a skill where can be honed in many ways. Funny enough, I'm thinking about, I had this team at Microsoft, the team I was in working on open source. They were actually called technical diplomats. Okay. All right. It was a very cool team. And their job was to go out and influence the competition, which is IBM, Oracle, Apple, Google, in order to develop cohesive standards for the industry that they're working on, right? Some of my colleagues were working on cloud standards. Eventually they got, like for example, PHP or Java enabled in Azure. And others are working, like I told you, HTML5. And they're very diplomatic. I'm not going to say political because it sounds negative, but very diplomatic in terms of truly respecting and understanding that there's another perspective trying to understand where it comes from. And that's why I was saying the alignment and strategy is important. Are you after growth and I'm after profitability or what, right? So truly understanding the other party's concerns, inviting them to come out of their shell to communicate it better. And then there's something called the charity principle, which is that you try to help the other party articulate their point of view. Okay, fix the wording, plug in the gaps, just make sure that they're truly understood. They have to feel truly, truly understood, right? And then you assess if you have a common interest or not. Actually, there's a course and a book, highly recommended, called Crucial Conversations. Incredible book. I mean, it's life-changing, okay? Not just from a work perspective, from a life perspective as well. That you have to establish with the other person some commonality in terms of values and interests. Now, of course, work, you don't have to align very much on values, but of course it matters to some extent. But at least the interest, what is it you are really after? We might disagree on a position on an issue, but we'll find a different issue to have a different position that we might agree on if we start from that commonality, right? Now, of course, this is very theoretical, but I think what really matters in this region is for product leaders and leaders in general, not necessarily only product. Again, that's the boxing thing I don't like, is to emulate how to do that to their team. And I think that's very missing over here, especially with the remote culture. I'm not super pro remote, but I think when people are in the same hallways, and at least that's how I learned, you want to see your manager compromising, articulating, agreeing, disagreeing, agreeing to disagree, and going through all those motions with the other department heads. So you understand, the tools that are acceptable in this organization. There's always politics. You understand what's allowed in terms of politics. You understand what's not allowed. Are you using data? Are you using emotions? Are you doing just deals? What does it take to actually make that influence happen, right? And there's no one size that fits all. But I think any good C-level or management, if they say they want something, they should emulate it to their team. Like, it would be hard to ask your team to be data-driven, but then management is not data-driven, right? It's hard to ask the team to excel in one area or compete in one area, but then the management just focus on something else, right? So that role modeling, I think sometimes in the speed of business and when you have very strong competitive forces, gets missed, okay? I feel that's something that could be done a bit better here in this region, where younger people just understand what are the rules of the game. Just tell us and we'll excel. People are, of course, more than eager to do well, but they just need to be told what are the rules of the game.
Abu Obeida, you worked in the Western markets. You worked here. You worked in marketplaces, fintechs, very technical products. What's your general assessment on the MENA market in general?
Yeah, I think it's a development assessment, right? As I meet and learn more, I think the key thing is more of a mindset issue, right? Whether it's engineering teams or product. I mean, I know we discuss a lot of specific product things, but like the role of product, people will have a certain view about it, developed over here. Oh, khalas, that's what it is, right? I think in the West, it's a bit more pragmatic and flexible, but also visionary, right? Really aiming for something in the long term, right? I think a lot of the companies over here will have a focus on surviving and getting the basics done and getting things done in a way that the company can survive, of course, the market can develop and the product can do well and customers will be happy. And it's a lot of work, and it's about, to be really honest, there's a lot of challenges over here, but also there's a lot of very impressive things happening. Okay, when I see the huge young population in Turkey, Egypt, here in Saudi, very eager to do a lot, very ambitious, very pushy. I find it very exciting, right? But at level of, I think, ambition and energy is lacking the right, not the environment, but also lacking the right guidance, okay? And it's, again, very natural. There's nothing faulty about anyone, right? The management culture in America or, Canada, that's where I lived, has evolved quite a bit. And I think there's a very important concept people need to kind of connect a bit with over here. Peter Drucker, very famous, management thinker. I didn't read much for him, but there's one particular thought I really loved it from him, which is that humanity is used to command and control, whether religious structures, empires, armies, farms, very physical labor, where you divide the work and assign and things get done, right? But then knowledge work, where the means of production is in your head. You're consuming knowledge and information from around you. You're producing a design, you're producing a mock-up, you're producing a sales plan, a marketing plan. As a unit of production, okay, you are quite different from an assembly line kind of worker, right? And in the West, that has evolved management to become much more people-centric, right? Much more empowering for people, much more keen on developing, empowering, but also holding accountable and creating a sort of mix of management that can really get the best out of people. Just a random personal story. Microsoft over here, I was working over here. My family and I had a major health crisis, okay, where I was not able to really work properly for a good number of months, okay, a good maybe 4 or 5 months. And I think I was working maybe like 4 hours a day. And at the end, there was a bill of 500,000 dirhams to be paid to a hospital, okay? And I remember my brother asking me that, man, like, did they get rid of you or what? Like, you're so expensive, you're not getting much done yet. What is this? And I was like, no. It doesn't even occur to my mind that such a thing would happen. Because in the little hours I was able to work per day, I was super focused on what I needed to do, which was funny enough, establishing a deal between Microsoft, MSN, and Amazon here, local Amazon, actually Souq at the time, and getting that deal done. And the company, sustained me, supported me, helped me out because I understood and they understood, and it was very clear and there was no question about it, that, they really value their people. Their people are super critical to get the job done. And one of the managers told me once that your career is like a highway. You know that line in the middle? Sometimes you swerve to the right, sometimes you swerve to the left. Sometimes you swerve to overserve the company and work crazy hours. And sometimes it swerves to the left for your own personal interest, maybe downtime, Christmas or whatever, where the management recognizes that December, not much work happens. August or July, well, Thanksgiving, not much work really happens, right? And they acknowledge that and they include it in the plans. They're not going to kill anyone for working crazy in that time, right? Push anyone. So there's this recognition of how to get the best out of people at the right time in their careers, juniors versus seniors, how to support them, how to help them. And not just, by the way, here's a funny thing. I actually believe HR and product management are super intertwined. And I remember I was discussing this with one of the founders in Saudi, and he's a very smart guy, but articulating this in the company can really shift the thinking of the company. Why? What is the HR guy what is he really supposed to do? He is responsible for the employee experience. Okay, so he acquires customers into that experience. He needs to figure out ways of acquiring the right customers for that experience. He needs to build engagement with that experience. And then he has to offboard people and handle all the cases, including customer support for that employee experience. But he needs to define the best employee experience, which is really customer experience. So all the product management principles applies to an HR person. How to acquire, how to retain, how to engage, how to get the maximum value and usage out of your customer, right? All these engagement metrics we talk about as product guys applies to the employee as well. So I think the ecosystem over here is still challenged in growing in this direction, not because we don't have, the ethics or anything like that. It's just that truly, there's so much to build. There's so many challenges over here that getting the damn thing right is really, honestly, a lot of work, right? And I think it's changing super fast, super fast, which is really, really impressive. For anyone who doesn't live in this region, I don't think they understand or appreciate how impressive this can be. I mean, think about it. Sunday, 7 p.m. at night, you can go do government work, government paperwork. Where else in the world you could do that, So the support over here is crazy on that level, right? Can you be on a WhatsApp basis with a government official getting work done? I don't think that happens anywhere else, okay? So you have a lot of amazing support that's developing in the ecosystem over here. But in terms of, founders, managers, investors, still there's a lot of development that needs to happen to help people do the actual right thing. And also vice versa goes for the employees. I mean, a lot of people jump between the companies a lot. So they don't have the time to mature in the setup, understand one review after another, and see the review cycle getting modified and changed, and the compensation model evolving within the company, the split between cash bonus and stock or ESOPs, understanding how it matters at different stages and levels. People haven't had that experience to appreciate what management also has to go through to create the right environment for the employees. So I think a lot of patience is needed from everyone to understand how to do things in a better way. But it's important to have that intention that we want to be a truly best employer, a truly best-in-class product. One thing that I haven't done much on, and I would like to do more in my kind of maybe next chapter, inshallah, yani, it's kind of the non-functional part of product, right? That you have the functional features that you got to scroll, you got to be able to buy and purchase and recurrent payment and all these different features every consumer app will have. People always discuss marketplace features or things like that. But the non-functional requirements, privacy, security, accessibility, what back in the day, Bill Gates called it trustworthy computing. I'm dealing with a computing thing, okay? Let's not get hung up if it's an app or something. But do I trust it? Is it an element that will make my life truly better? Do I trust it to preserve my data, protect my data? I think the regulators in the Middle East, Saudi and UAE, are doing an incredible job, okay? Specifying a lot of tough and very serious regulations that are actually needed. But why are they doing it, I believe, is because the consumer is very sophisticated over here. The consumer over here knows what global tech companies are able to do. So they're demanding the same from local tech companies. See, in America, it's a bit different. People are always impressed with whatever Apple brings to them because Apple is ahead of the curve and defining where the tech is going, Apple and other companies. But here, we already see Apple and Amazon and others. So we expect the same level of quality from the local tech companies. And I understand it's a very difficult challenge, right? Being in that seat for a few years. There's a lot of aspects of building tech companies as companies, tech teams, product teams, design, getting all this right that, there are other things that they don't have time to think about, right? And I think those are things that I personally would like to focus on moving forward in terms of making it easier and better for the ecosystem to use. But the key challenge, again, I think is just the mindset. Having a goal beyond just the commercials. It's like saying, I have an OKR of having 10 million breaths before I die. Well, of course, to survive, I have to breathe. Well, a company to have a goal of certain profitability, well, of course, you'll be profitable. Otherwise, you're not going to survive as a company. But beyond that, really, what's the vision? What's the mission? What is it you're trying to change in the world, in this part of the world? How is tech, a contributing factor into improving productivity in society over here? Having strong opinions on that and sharing with the team and rallying the team behind that, I think it's a bit missing. I would love to see more of that.
Man, that was an insane episode. I still have a lot of questions that I haven't had time to go into. But where do you want to route our audience to? How can we or our audience be helpful for you in the next chapter?
Oh, I don't. Your audience helpful to me. I want to be helpful to your audience. But I mean, if anyone wants to share feedback with me, I'm always open to hearing feedback.
I'm going to include LinkedIn. Is the best way to reach you out?
Oh, yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. LinkedIn is absolutely great. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn. And online calls, always doable, right? And the world is a very small, interesting place. But I hope people can take some of the points over here and challenge the status quo, challenge us around them. I mean, our part of the world is really incredible. So many great things happening, and we see change happening, right? We really see it happening. I traveled to Riyadh, something is new. I traveled back to Dubai, something is new over here, right? And I think the youth in this sector have more power than they realize. And they just need to demand it, out of their environment, and they'll get it.